Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and the Texas Veterans Land Board. If you are a veteran in the great state of Texas, please check out the many services, home loans, land loans, home refurbishment loans that you can get from the Veterans Land Board. Today I have a special guest with me, Kevin Zimmerman. He is the National Director of Outreach for Springstone Incorporated's Help for Heroes. Kevin, thank you for being on the program with us today. Tell us about your military background.
First, let me say thank you, Dan. It's an honor to be here. I served 20 years in the United States Army. My first 3 years, I was a combat medic. Then I spent 15 years as a flight medic before I learned how to walk again the last 2 years prior to my retirement. Those last 2 years, I served as the operations and non-commissioned officer in charge of the hospital.
So I'm interested to know for our audience what your current role now at Help for Heroes is. Can you tell us about the program and what you oversee?
Oh, absolutely. The Help for Heroes program is a uniform specific program that uses evidence-based treatment that's designed for uniformed service members dealing with mental health and chemical dependency issues. My responsibility is to ensure that every military installation across the United States is affiliated with our programs that are strategically placed across the country and the resources that we have made available to those service members.
So how much has digital outreach or how much has outreach changed, in a digital landscape over the last several months?
Oh my goodness, has it?
Just a little
Um,
bit, huh?
oh, absolutely. Because initially, I would say on average, I would leave home on Tuesday and return home by Thursday evening, Friday morning. You know, I would miss the wife. We would miss each other when I leave. We say good night and I love you every night. And she couldn't wait till I get home. And I couldn't wait to get home by Thursday night or Friday. Then by Sunday, she's looking at her watch and I'm looking at my honey-do list and we're waiting for that cycle to start again. Now, and when I left, let me back up a little bit. When I left, I'm generally dealing with decision makers on military installations face to face. And these are, in many cases, your higher ranking officers that are responsible for the oversight of mental health and chemical dependency treatment. Of course, now you can't do that for a couple of reasons. One, most of our military installations across the country, when it comes to mental health and their clinics, they too are dealing with the same things that we're dealing with COVID-19. So they want to minimize the amount of foot traffic that's coming into the clinic, which compels us now to do our meeting via what you and I are doing now. The challenge there is although you do get to communicate and although you get an opportunity to share your information, we are creatures of connectivity. We are all people who like interacting with other people for the most part. And that helps a great deal because you can also read body language if you're in a room of more than one person. And you can focus your attention to someone that may need information that could be beneficial if you read their body language. Where in situations like this that we're in, sometimes depending upon the angle of the Zoom or if you span in or out, you don't have that opportunity. So what I found myself doing was asking on a few occasions, does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have any questions? And I have to slow myself down and not move on to the next topic of discussion to make sure that everyone that's on that call or that's on that Zoom meeting that we're on or video conference get their questions addressed.
I have to ask, since you spent a lot of time outside of the house, is your wife ready to kick you back out there and get you back on the road again?
You know,
Are you enjoying the time at home a little?
well, no, really, it's worked out great for us. Ago, we built our home that we're in now. And fortunately for us, my office is upstairs, and my wife's office is downstairs, directly underneath me. So that gives us an opportunity to social distance from each other. And we generally look forward to coming together at the end of the day. Fortunately, my wife has, man, she's an interior designer, and she's got more on her plate than she can handle. And I'm up here still trying to make sure that our uniformed service members and veterans get the care that they need. So the way the house is designed has put us in a position where we were able to survive this thing for as long as we have.
Do you miss being on the road? Do you miss the personal connections? I know obviously with your job, I imagine that, like you said, being in the room with people is something that you can't replace. But almost from a personal perspective, do you miss getting on the plane? Do you miss being in the airports? Do you miss going on to base? Is there something that you're really looking forward to having the experiences again?
Um, Two parts to this answer. The first one is I don't miss being on the planes and traveling. I know that some that don't do that, when they see that, that looks glamorous and flamboyant. But
Yeah.
if you ever spend a lot of time going to airports and sleeping in hotels, you will know that that is not what it appears to be.
Yeah.
However, um, that sacrifice is second to none. And yes, I do miss dealing with people and meeting them in person. And primarily, Dan, the reason behind that is in that 15-year tenure that I was a flight medic, I went on to multiple deployments in hostile environments. And I myself was diagnosed with traumatic stress to the degree that I lost my first family, where I had to self-enroll into a treatment program, learn how to manage those triggers. And now here I am today living a holistic lifestyle. And so when I'm in the room, when I'm physically there, that's a connectivity that you can't get through this. But when I'm in that room, that vibe, that connectivity comes to life, and they know that I'm not talking to them about their service members or their veteran. I am that service member or that veteran.
Can you tell the audience about that experience and kind of the deployments and the combat that you were in, and then really kind of how you started to, one, acknowledge that you were struggling, and then what were some of the ways that you were able to seek help?
Certainly. I would have to say that the primary experiences that I can highlight was Bosnia-Herzegovina, where the whole country was riddled with landmines. You had the Serbians warring against the Croatians against the Muslims against the Serbians, and they put us in the middle and said, make them all stop. But unfortunately, that's a tall order. And in many cases, those whom we were going into mine fields to get weren't always just service members. Some, I'll never forget, one mine mission I went on, Dan, was an 8-year-old boy who had stepped on a landmine. And when we got there, the women were, I don't know if you're familiar with the women of wailing in the Old Testament, but they were scratching themselves and throwing dirt up in the air. And the father was holding the little boy on his knee. But I noticed the little boy never shed a tear. even though his leg was blown off, he never shed a tear. And later I talked to a doctor and asked, how did he think that happened? And he said it could have been that he was brought up all his life in a culture or an environment where maybe someday he expected, or he's seen it so much that he expected that's going to be him. And then
Right.
they came. Those things, you know, they get burnt in, and they don't go away. I'll never even forget my first mission that was in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, when we breached to go into Baghdad. And here I was at one point at home with the family, and in the blink of an eye, our helicopter is landing. We're taking fire, and I'm running to help this service member who had gotten injured out there. And then I hear the word incoming, and then you cover him up. You hear the round hit the ground. This massive explosion happens. You realize you're okay, and then you get back in the aircraft, and you get back to safety, and you go do it again. Those are things that don't go away. And so what ended up happening was I didn't really realize that I wasn't coping with it.
Right.
Even though I lost my family, I do remember being triggered by the most menial things, such as I'd come home, the lights would be on in the house, it's dark, and the windows would be wide open, and then I'd have a fit because I could see all the way through the house. And I would try to emphasize that I'm trying to take care of you guys here. You guys aren't helping me. The enemy can see all the way in this house. You can't see outside, you know, and they're sharing that would be true if we were in a combat environment. You know, this is Pinewood Avenue here. What ended up happening one morning was my best friend called me, and he asked me what I was doing. I said, oh man, I'm just sitting here having a glass of scotch, watching the news. And then I never factored, it was 9 o'clock in the morning. You know? And he in turn, love him to death, man, and was dead serious, expressed that if you don't go and get some help right now, I am going to be on the first thing smoking out of Seattle, and I'm going to be there, and getting you some help is not an option. And so I did, out of realizing in that moment, all those things that I shared with you, the loss of the family, the drinking scotch at 9 in the morning, and then a few things in between, even attempted suicide at one point. Never went to that point, but I was there at that breaking point. I realized, you know, this is out of control. And so I did. I went and got the treatment, learned how to manage the triggers. And now here I am, lo and behold, talking to you, man, and using those experiences to be able to let those know that are facing similar circumstances like that, that your tomorrow can be a whole lot better than your today.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with such honesty and such openness. And before we actually began our recording here today, I kind of asked you and just broached the idea, even if it's possible for a first responder or for somebody in the military who may go on to experience some of the trauma and combat that you experienced, is there a way for them to steel themselves for that event? And maybe the concept that keeps coming back to me is preventative medicine. Like, can somebody who's a first responder or a medic or an infantryman, can they do things prior to and during those traumatic events to act almost as a barrier for some of the difficult things that they will experience?
You know, I thought about the question when you asked, and in my humble opinion, I honestly don't know if you can prepare yourself for those things that you come into contact with that you normally don't see, or the average person doesn't deal with on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if you can prepare yourself for seeing the results of a tragedy involving a human being.
Right.
And I don't know if you can mentally say, I know I'm going to see this, and it's not going to have an impact.
Yeah,
So,
and it, like you said, it's, I guess if it, not to say that it wouldn't have an impact, but if it didn't have an impact, you wouldn't be, you wouldn't be human, and you wouldn't
absolutely.
have, yeah, because the empathy is something that obviously, as a medic, is extremely crucial to the core of not just the services that you provide, but the intention in which you provide that service. So what was it about then after those experiences that allowed you to return to the healthiest version of yourself?
One, coming to grips with the reality that I never dealt with the trauma that I had seen. One of the things I love about the American service member or the American first responder is I have, and I've been all over the world, I have yet to see anyone who has the highest regard for human life than the American service member or the American first responder. And because of that, we have this ability to exhibit this selfless service where it's almost as if we check out of ourselves for the good. There's something greater that has to happen that's bigger than me. And that's what our service members and our first responders do. They come out of themselves and realize that they have the ability to potentially get someone that's in need to a better space.
Yeah.
And they will, we have seen it through the histories of our lifetime. There is not a circumstance that's so big that could cause them to resist the opportunity to go in and do that.
Can I pause you real quick? Is that something that guides you still today? Because you have continued to lead and continue to serve after the military. And for the purposes of Next Gen Warrior Show, that is our definition of success. Do you think that that spirit and that mantra that you talked about just a love for life and taking care of people, is that something that continues to motivate you today?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel I'm extremely blessed. No offense to anyone that's listening. But I would do this even if I did not get paid. Because there's something about, Dan, when you are at a place that you could never imagine or explain. And in some cases, that place is not very comfortable. And then to be able to come out of that and see someone there and know that, hey, if you cut me and I cut you, we both are going to bleed red blood.
Right.
With that being a fact, I know you can get to a better space. And it's something to be able to empathize with someone instead of just sympathize with them. And it calls you, man. It draws you. It's not a day. It's not a day that I can say, like I've heard so many people, man, I hate getting up going in the morning. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. To be able to know that I can help any man, any girl of any race, color, creed, nationality, doesn't matter. If I could help you get to a better space in life, just getting through mental health or chemical dependency issues, you're talking about a motivating force, man. That is it.
And is that kind of what you would say maybe prevents burnout? Because I know for many people that we've talked to on the show who are what I would describe, I'm not saying they would describe themselves this way, but I would describe them as high achievers. And what I mean by that is they love what they do. They love getting up in the morning to do it. And like you said, if they could do it without getting paid, that's what God put them on this earth to do. So for somebody like that, who has that kind of motor, who has the drive and the skills, how do you prevent burnout? How do you continue to keep yourself going?
Well, fortunately, I'm surrounded by a group of people who we watch each other closely. And I wanted to acknowledge that because I don't want to try to sit up here as if I got this big S on my chest, because we won't stop.
Mm-hmm.
We won't stop. But I'm fortunate to have people around me that can identify characteristic changes, behavioral changes, and are able to call those things out. I think what I've learned through the treatment that I went through is to acknowledge when it's recognized, even if it's recognized by someone else, and not pretend that it doesn't exist, to accept my faults, my weaknesses, my shortcomings, and realize that needs to be dealt with, or it's going to create a bigger problem down the road. So I would have to say that for me, it's the people that I'm blessed to be surrounded by, and on an individual note, there are times when you do say, you know what, man, that was kind of out of character. But then when you say that, take ownership of it. Don't try to make it anything else than other than what it really was. Don't make excuses for it. Own it and know. Fortunately, I know because of treatment, what do I need to do now to prevent things getting worse going, down the road.
So can in the Now You Know segment that we did prior to the show, you talked about a book that you had been reading and that you recommended, and it's actually one that I had read as well. It's called Principles by Ray Dalio, and I think it's actually a great book for anybody who is listening to this program and who is aspiring to lead, who is either transitioning out of the military and is looking for some guidance. Can you talk to us about why you would recommend that book to a veteran or even a non-service member in the audience?
Absolutely. One of the things, Dan, I think even you might agree with here is we were taught, as much as we want to be successful, all of us want to be successful. We were taught to, if you do things that leaders do, there's a higher probability that your outcome can be similar. And when you look at the success of Ray Dalio, and those successes are built on moral values and principles, they provide those guidelines and those barriers that will allow you to perform in life where you have some boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so you will know not only you're within or going outside of the boundaries, but it also, those principles helped me, and this is why I would recommend to someone else. As I read his book, it helped me to realize sometimes my aspirations were exceeding my ability.
Huh.
And so that can kind of keep you on track as well.
Can I pause you real quick before? Can you speak maybe specifically about that, whether if it was a job or the experience that you had where you felt like you were shooting too high? If I don't mean to take the words out of your mouth, but what that situation was, and then what kind of the outcome of it was?
Oh, no, you great question, and don't mind it at all. In the book, he talks about surrounding yourself with smart people. One of the things that I am not sharp at. I'm kind of familiar with it. I kind of get the basics of it. But when it comes to statistics, man, don't throw a bunch of statistics in front of me with these charts and graphs and think I'm going to look at it in 2 minutes and have this thing figured out. And when I came into doing what I was doing, of course, it's a results-driven industry.
Right.
You measure those results with statistics. So I was fortunate enough to realize I'm not good at this, but I got someone that works one desk over. And it causes you to humble yourself and not say, I'm the end all, be all, know it all. But I had to go to that person and say, look, you guys showed me this. I got some idea of what I'm looking at, but if no one explains this to me, I will have no earthly idea what I'm really supposed to be looking at. And that, I think that's a simple response to knowing what your weakness is, but you have resources around you, and exercising the humility to ask someone that's smarter than you about a particular subject so that the greater good can move forward.
Absolutely. I want to go back to something we talked about a little bit earlier in our conversation. I asked you about how outreach is from your perspective in such a digital environment, but I'm also interested how you too have maintained community. And I think for the veterans that are in my circle and the ones that we've talked to and the experiences that I had, I knew that some of my anxiety, depression, and service-related issues after I got out of the military were tied to, in some ways, to isolation, or I didn't find good people, a good support network to have around me. What have you been doing over the last couple months to remain in community with people and to be able to continue to build relationships with you? What do you think is something that you're doing that has worked that you could share with the audience?
Another great question. For personal growth and development, man, my children and grandchildren have seen my face now more than COVID-19 has hit. However, it provides a consolation of the soul that I cannot explain. Knowing the jeopardy that I could be putting them in if I walked in the house or if they walked in our home, but I can get on this thing. We can still see each other's faces. We can still see each other's smiles, hear each other's laughters, still engage that way. That's huge. The second thing, with the George Bush Institute, fortunately for me, the Veterans Leadership Program is committed to presenting opportunities where you can engage with your cohort and other members of the Bush Institute and talk about a variety of subjects and engage in various different topics and see each other, although you're spread all the way across the country. And I can't tell you, Dan, how I feel when I get off of those calls. To be able to see members of my cohort and members of others, and to see world leaders willing to come down to your level in one space, even though it's on a screen, and relate to you and share information and say, I'm here for you. I've even gotten off of some of those calls and directly contacted some of the folks that were on the call. And so I would say, if I have to answer that in a nutshell, utilizing the resource that is made available to you, but don't stay in a bubble. Don't say, hey, I don't like this technology stuff. I'd rather talk in person. That's like someone who used to walk 5 miles a day, get a bum knee, now they can't walk and say, well, I'm not going to get on a bike or I'm not going to swim. that's not going to help you. You have to take advantage of the resources made available. And when those opportunities present itself, if you participate, you will get something out of it. And I know, well, at least I feel I have.
No, I think that's a great point. It's almost like the the lesson, like you put in, you get out what you put in, and I think
Yes.
there's definitely something to that. So I appreciate you walking us through that, because yeah, and when we are social distance, community seems to be important now more than ever.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
I'm interested too in the calls that you had, because you were a member of the 2019 Veterans Leadership Scholarship Program at the Bush Institute. And they have a great program that brings veterans together from different industries, different backgrounds. And I'm interested to know more about that program and what you learned from it.
Wow. Man, do we have enough time?
You're gonna need an extra hour or so, huh?
Absolutely. For one, um, the one thing that I've learned came from the words of President George Bush himself. And it was the first time we saw him as a group, our cohort, when the first day he came into the room. And he walked in, of course, and you stand up, you still do the presidential deal, you stand up, and when he sits, you sit. And we're all waiting to hear him say something presidential, and he's doing the typical George release.
Yeah.
And the first words out of his mouth that I'll go to my grave remembering is, after he did this for about a minute, he said, "You cannot lead anyone anywhere to do anything if you don't have joy." And then he didn't say anything else for about a minute. You cannot lead anyone anywhere to do anything if you don't have joy. And it's that stuck with me, because in all of this stuff that we've talked about, there is a joy, there's a pleasure, there's a reward, however you want to call it, that compels us to continue to do those things that we do day in and day out. And so I then learned, second thing I learned, that was the first thing that hit me. I often would look around the room and wonder, how did I get here? When you look at who they bring into that cohort, there was a guy named, I'm gonna call him by the name Rich. Rich was a general in the Army. He was a general. There's another guy over here, he's a doctor. You look over there, there's a lawyer. And you have a tendency to look at this social economic plateau. And if you're not carrying one of those titles, you try to figure out what happened. Me, I said, okay, well, my name's Zimmerman, that's Z. They got down to the bottom of the barrel they needed to fill. We were at the Z's, they picked that guy.
Alphabetical choice, huh? They're like, we got to.
Hey, man, they had to fill a spot. They were at the Z, they grab him. But he then says, if you're wondering why you're supposed to be here, it's because you're supposed to be here. And he then let us know that everyone has a unique thumbprint. And no matter what your social economic status is, race, gender, there's a group of veterans that surround you that no one can touch but you. And those are the two most important things that I got out of it. Lastly, though, if I could add, the plethora of resources made available to you when you engage with your comrades in the Bush Institute. I've not met anyone, I haven't, my experience, that is not willing to link up with you in order to help you move the veteran space forward. So that, man, that was an experience that I will go to my grave eternally grateful for.
Yeah, it's a really incredible experience. And I don't think I ever thought about we have a chance to talk about leadership, to talk about service here on Next Gen Warrior. And one thing that I never really had the concept brought up to us was the concept of leading with joy. And it's a really kind of a discussion on emotional intelligence, right? And I actually think that that goes back to your desire to continue to do what you do because you find joy from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you, that light bulb did not come on for me until he said it.
Well, Kevin, I know we're going to bring the show to a close here, and I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Is there anything that we did not get to hit on, or is there a message that you would like to provide our audience before we go ahead and close it out?
Yes, absolutely. Being that I am in the mental health and chemical dependency field, with all that's going on, we know that many of us veterans are struggling in those areas. What I want to say to anyone struggling with those areas is I'm also aware of the excuses why you don't get help. It's not going to work. I don't want anybody to know that I'm dealing with this. If I get help here, I'm going to lose this. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose my job. I want to say to those folks out there that if you don't go and get the help that's made available to you, you're going to lose everything. While you're trying to avoid losing something, if you don't get the help you need, you are going to lose everything. Now, here's the caveat to that. You don't have to. You don't have to make you the priority. And I'm a living witness of someone who was in that space. And now here I am talking to Dan on this show with a beautiful wife downstairs and my dog under my foot. You don't have to lose everything. Help is available. If you go and get help, because we often hear this too, I went here and it didn't work. Well, I also want to share, if I could throw this in, and not just pleading on the bad things that's happened, but I was once diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I went and I had the surgery for the prostate cancer. Few years later, prostate cancer came back. You know, it was in remission for a while. Then here it is. It surfaced again in 2011. Then I didn't say, hey, man, that didn't work. So I guess that's the end of the game. I had to go get treatment again, a different form of treatment. And I got that treatment, and it was 2015, I'm sorry, it came back. And I got that treatment in 2015. Here we are in 2020. And the cancer has been in remission ever since. And I wanted to use that analogy to say, if you did something and you don't feel that that worked, go someplace else and do something else. But continue to fight for your own life. Choose life at every cost. Whatever you have to do, choose life.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you being on our program today, and I appreciate you leading with joy. And you are really the epitome of what Next Gen Warrior is about, which is continued service and continued leadership to their community after the military. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Dan, it was an honor. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and the Texas Veterans Land Board, we are going to leave it there today. Kevin, I feel like we could have spent another 20 or 30 minutes talking, and also appreciate you working with me through some technical difficulties there at the beginning. But that's the nature of, having these conversations remotely. But it really does bring a sense of community to have people like yourself on the program to talk about the challenges of chemical dependency and how that veterans can overcome these things and really continue to lead and serve in their communities after they leave the military. On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and the Texas Veterans Land Board, again, I am your host, Dan Hamilton. It is always an honor and privilege to bring these discussions to you. Thank you for supporting our program. We will see you next Monday.
Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior podcast.